What's up, y'all? Welcome in. It is just the second video in the history of this channel, and I have already spent too much on Pokemon cards. So today we're going to focus our energies on something that I'm used to spending a lot of time on over on my Magic the Gathering channel, one of my favorite subjects. Let's talk budget decks today. But not just any budget deck, the budget deck. Over this last month, I've waded through more garbage than your dad at a North Florida flea market. And that means I've played the truly heinous stuff. Your Wugtrios, your Sandacondas, your Mouseholds. And yes, this is a fact. All of these decks are truly, truly terrible. Take my knowledge and use it for good. There are even a bunch of decks that I really enjoyed playing, but I can't in good conscience say have any real potential, like Castform, which is really sad because he's my buddy. Look at him, he's great. But at the end of the day, I was able to settle on three $20 decks that I wanted to present to you today because I had a decent amount of success with them on the ladder, and more importantly, they're really fun to play. But if you'll allow me one more aside before we really jump into these decks today as kind of an honorable mention, I want to bring up a couple of decks that the Pokemon TCG Live app just starts you off with, like Chien-Pao EX and Giratina Lost Box. I think these are the best decks that the game starts you with, although the game also started me with Miraidon EX. It's a pretty good deck, but these two on screen right now, I think are incredible decks. Now, on paper, they'd cost, more than twice as much to order as any of the decks we'll look at today. So I think that's a major factor, but they definitely meet the definition of budget on the TCG Live app because they're more or less just given to you for logging in. So I wanted to, again, kind of give an honorable mention to these two decks. If you're playing on the Live app, these are really good decks to choose when you start out. All right, you ate the asparagus. I promised you steak. Let's sink our teeth in. We're going to talk about three budget decks, all under 20 bucks, that I think are worth ordering in paper, especially for first timers. And number one, I actually did order in paper, but let's get to number three first and talk about Alcremie Cafe Master. Now, looking at the key cards in the deck, let's take a look at Cafe Master first. This is a supporter. Choose up to 3 of your benched Pokemon. For each of those dudes, search your deck for a different type of basic energy and attach it to that dude. Then shuffle your deck and your turn ends, which sounds like it kind of sucks a little bit, right? But you have Alcremie in your deck. This has additional order. As long as this is in your active spot, Cafe Master doesn't end your turn. But that is arguably not even the best part of Alcremie. See, she's got this attack, Rainbow Flavor, for 2 of any energy. It does 10 plus damage, and that plus is 40 more damage for each basic energy type attached to all of your guys. So if you're fully powered up, this attack does 330 damage. Now that takes out very nearly everything in standard right now. There are some VMAX and EX that have more HP than that, but for the most part, you're going to knock out just about anything in one hit if you're fully powered up. And even if you're not fully powered up, you can do a lot of damage with this attack. But my favorite thing about this deck is that it has all kinds of tricksy little ways to get set up. Now, if you're smart, and I know you're very perceptive, you may have caught that Alcremie has to be active to work with Cafe Master, not to end your turn, right? And Cafe Master, again, you're perceptive, you read that it only puts energy on your benched Pokemon, so it doesn't actually put energy on the active Alcremie. But that's why we play Energy Switch in our deck. Actually, one of the many reasons we play Energy Switch, and this is probably the only deck you'll see in the modern era on a YouTube channel playing Energy Switch. It's not a very common card nowadays, but all you have to do is Cafe Master, get that energy onto a benched Mon, and then switch one of them onto Alcremie, plus energy for the turn. You might be doing as much as 330 that turn, bud. But of course, Alcremie only has 90 HP, so it's a little bit brittle. It's going to get knocked out the moment they have a chance to actually knock it out with something that has energy on it, right? So ideally, you just load up another Alcremie on your bench, but you have to get that one set up too. Now, you can just Cafe Master Energy Switch, but another trick in the deck is Raihan. We're playing 2 whole Raihan in this build of the deck. There's a lot of different builds of it, more on that in a second, but Raihan is great because when we do get an Alcremie knocked out, we can go grab whatever we want from our deck. Sometimes it's an Alcremie to evolve a Milcery that's on our bench, and sometimes it's whatever the heck we want. But more importantly, we can attach one of the basic energy that just came off the Alcremie to the new Alcremie, and again, energy for the turn, get attacking as quickly as possible again. We've also got Clara in the deck, which can get back both Milcery and Alcremie, plus the 2 energy needed to set it up, if need be. Super Rod is in the deck, again, to get back whatever combination of Pokemon and energy we need to do to get this combo set back up. Pal Pad is in this deck to keep us flush with Cafe Masters and other supporters, and then Pokegear is a one of in here to make sure we can find them in the first place. A Cafe Master on turn 1 when we go second is extremely important to the game plan, so this is effectively a 5th Cafe Master if we don't get one in our opener. We've got Level Ball in here to find the alchemy among a couple of other things, but it doesn't find everything. That said, it finds some of our most important mons, so I am playing some Level Ball, along with 3 Ultra Ball to make sure that we definitely find our most important Pokemon. Aside from that, the rest of the trainers in the deck look pretty familiar to anybody who plays Pokemon. We've got 2 Boss's Orders, which can be great to boss up something relatively big, a 2 or even 3 prizer some of the time, and knock it out for 330 with an Alchemy. Boss's Orders is great in just about every deck, but it's especially good in this one, where we can out of nowhere ambush for 330 and take out a VMAX relatively easily. But I need to tell you about some of our other Pokemon before I go over some of the other things in the deck. Blissey V is our other main attacker in the deck, but usually doesn't attack until late game when we don't have another Alchemy to set back up. One attack with the Blissey will put all the energy in our discard pile, which should be a good bit of it depending on where we are in the game state. And then if it can survive one crack, which it usually can, it's going to do a lot of damage the next time it gets to attack. Lumineon V is also in this deck, although it's not going to be in every single build. However, we have Penny in our deck, which allows us to pick back up the Lumineon V and play it again for another supporter, like a Cafe Master. If Cafe Master wasn't so important to our deck, I might not be playing the Lumineon V, but we need it as early in the game as possible. So I'm playing Lumineon plus Penny combo here, so we can get as many supporters as we need, and sometimes remove these 2 prize Pokemon from our bench with the Penny to make sure our opponent doesn't get any ideas, right? We also have Collapse Stadium in the deck to do effectively the same thing, right? If we have a Blissey V or a Lumineon crowd in the bench, all we have to do is play Collapse Stadium and get one of these 2 prizers off if we want to do that. Rounding things out here, we got a Miltank and a Mimikyu to deal with various larger dudes, right? Miltank definitely deserves more credit than it gets. It's basic with 110 HP, a decent little ability here, and not a bad attack if your opponent has a full bench, and a lot of standard decks count on having a full bench. So Miltank is much better than a lot of people I think give it credit for, and Mimikyu, people already know how annoying this is. This, the Ghost Eye attack, and along with Milcery's attack, especially the ability to go get a supporter, are the reason why we run more psychic energy than any other kind of energy in the deck, plus the fog crystals to go get not only the energy when needed, but also the alchemies and Milcerys. Overall, this is a fun to play deck that does surprisingly well against some of the stuff in the meta, especially decks that rely almost exclusively on 2 and 3 prizers to do the heavy lifting. If you can get that alchemy set up, you can do a lot of work. And again, against those very same decks with lots of Vs and whatnot, Miltank and Mimikyu will either help you stall the setup or actually just do all the damage you need them to do to finish the game off. But again, there are a lot of ways to build this deck. I'm not even the premier expert on this deck in my own household. My wife is actually the one that's been doing a lot of different alchemy experimentation over the last couple of weeks, and she's got an alchemy lost box deck that's actually really, really good, not to mention probably another half dozen builds with this card. So there's a lot of ways to build it. And a fun fact, by the way, is that you can more or less build an alchemy Cafe Master deck out of a box of Brilliant Stars, but you shouldn't have to go to those links. These are all extremely cheap cards to order. Even the full art rare of Alchemy only cost about 50 cents on TCG Player right now. So this is an incredibly cheap deck to order that actually has some decent spots in the meta and is a lot of fun to play. However, just in the interest of fairness, another weakness I should point out before I move on to the next deck is that this deck's Lost Zone box matchup is pretty abysmal, but that just puts it in the same territory as about 50% of the rest of the field. Against a lot of 2 prizer heavy decks, this deck is actually able to do a lot of work. But we got to keep it pushing. I have spent way too long on this deck, and I'll probably spend way too long on deck number 2, which we're calling Cherry Snorlax. Now this deck does use the Cherrim engine, more on that in a second if you have no idea what I'm talking about, but this deck is mostly centered around Snorlax. Now this time, I am the premier expert in my own household about a card because I've built about a half a dozen different Snorlax control lists over the last couple of weeks, and I've been really enjoying this card. Snorlax is just a single prizer, 150 HP with an attack that does 180 damage. That is very close to Pokemon V territory, but it's on a single prizer, and we haven't even gotten to the ability, which prevents all the effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to the Snorlax, aside from, of course, damage. This will keep things like Giratina V-Star from using the ability that just knocks it out, right? Or Mimikyu, for that matter. We were just looking at it in the last deck. That just puts damage counters on stuff. Snorlax is not affected by things like that. So I've been having a lot of meta fun with Snorlax over the last couple of weeks, and this is the build that I've enjoyed the most. The only downside with Snorlax, if you don't know, is that his attack puts him to sleep. Now, there's a couple of kind of gimmicky ways around that in the current environment. This time, we're using Therapeutic Energy, which says the Pokemon this card is attached to recovers from being asleep, confused, paralyzed, and can't be affected by those special conditions. So in other words, his attack just won't put him to sleep anymore. So you just get a basic, no downside, 150 HP, 180 attack Pokemon, which is pretty good, especially when you slap, say, a Bravery Charm on him, and he becomes 200 HP, which is now bigger and able to do more damage than some starting Pokemon V. Pretty impressive, but there's also a Choice Belt in here, so he can take out Vs more easily. There's Escape Rope. This deck actually does have switch effects, like Escape Rope and Switch Cart, so you can heal a basic Snorlax when you switch him out. Now, Lax might be our main attacker in the deck, but our other Pokemon serve a lot of different purposes, right? Cherrim is our engine for getting energy onto stuff, aside from the Kricketune V that you see here. It can't put energy on that with Spring Bloom, but Spring Bloom allows us to just take grass energy from our hand and throw them onto any of our non-rule box Pokemon. That means we can power up a Snorlax's attack really, really fast. Even if you don't have Therapeutic Energy in your hands, sometimes it's worth it to go ahead and power up Snorlax's attack and see if you win those coin flips. Even if you don't win the coin flips, sometimes it's best to just let him get knocked out on the crackback, throw another Snorlax in the active on the next turn, and power it up with Cherrim as well. Other important Pokemon in this deck are Bidoof and Bibarel, of course. We're playing a 2-2 line here, not super uncommon. Drawing up to 5 cards with Industrious and Sizers every turn is very good, but we've also got Kricketune V in this deck to help keep our hand fresh in much the same way that a Bibarel does. Now, I'm waffled back and forth on including this card because Cherrim cannot put energy onto him, as we've already discussed, and it's the 2-prizer that has relatively low HP and is prone to getting bosses up to the front, and they take 2 prizes from you. That does suck. It's not great, but I do think it warrants its own inclusion as not just a way to keep your hand fresh, but also an occasional attacker when you're really hard up for one. The only real problem that I have with this deck, I have a couple, but the only real one, is the lack of decent ball search, if you'll not giggle at that. Level Ball does go get Cherrim, which is very important, but it doesn't get a whole heck of a lot else in this deck. Aside from that, we've got Nest Balls to go get Snorlaxes, Bibarels, Cherubis, and whatnot. But I would like a little bit more ball search. I'm just not sure what the softest slots are in the deck. If I had to take a guess, it's probably Path to the Peak, considering we have a Kricketune V in our deck. But Path to the Peak, even with the Kricketune V in our deck, is very, very good against a lot of the field right now, and we can mostly shrug it off. Now, just like our first deck, I find that Lost Zone Box is not a great matchup, but I do feel like it's a marginally better matchup for this deck than it is the Alchemy deck, because there's nothing knocking out Snorlax in one hit. Sableye can't do it, Cramorant can't do it, so they have kind of a tough time with this deck on occasion. That said, single prize decks are not what we really want to come up against. For the most part, we also want to 2-prize people with the Snorlax. I found this deck to be not only fun, but straightforward, which I think is really important if you're going to order your first Pokemon deck in paper. You don't have all the experience in the world with the game, and its linearity doesn't really keep it from feeling powerful. Again, you've got Kricketune V, you've got Bibarel keeping your hand fresh, Iono and Professor's Research to make sure you can cycle through cards quickly. You've got Cherrim to just ramp stuff onto your Snorlax. Snorlax gets Bravery Charm and he just feels unstoppable. So this deck does a lot of very powerful stuff, while again, not presenting you with too much decision fatigue. It's fairly straightforward what you're supposed to do from turn to turn without having these like dead turns. I like that. I value that a lot in a deck, and I think that the ability to just play linearly does have some value to it, especially for your first Pokemon deck as a player starting out. But let's get to our final deck of the day. This is the one that I actually did end up ordering in paper, and I think is the culmination of a deck that is fun to play, easy to learn, and yet has those wrinkles where you can learn little gameplay loops and elements as you play the deck. Again, I think that holds a lot of value. You don't necessarily always want a deck that's super straightforward right out of the box. Sometimes you want a deck that's not only easy to understand, but can be difficult to master. It gives you a chance to do that with it. With all that in mind, I have chosen United Wings. Now, look, I know there's going to be a lot of people who are already pretty invested in the Pokemon TCG, know what this deck is, and they just groaned. But again, I think that this deck has a lot to it and a lot going for it if you're going to order a first deck in paper and you don't want to spend too much money, but you want a powerful deck that you can have fun with and learn as you go. I think this deck hits all of those boxes perfectly. Established Pokemon players may also notice that there's a little bit of what we will call innovation in this deck. It's probably the nicest word for it. We'll get to that in a second, but just in case you have no idea what this is United Wings, named because of this attack on this Wattrel and this Murkrow and this Flamigo, you see. We'll look at the Wattrel. This has United Wings. It costs 2 energy on the Wattrel, and it's 20 damage for each Pokemon in your discard pile that has the United Wings attack. So we saw 3 of them. There's 4 apiece. That's 12 in all. That means that this attack can do a total of 240 damage at maximum if every single United Wings Mon is in the yard. Now, how do we pull that off? How are you attacking with United Wings Mon if they're all in the yard? Well, we're using Ditto, which has the ability to do the attack of any basic non-rule box Pokemon in the discard pile. Turns out that all of our United Wings Pokemon are basic non-V Pokemon. So all we have to do is slap a Dark or Double Turbo energy onto Ditto and attack with United Wings. There are times, though, where you actually do want to be attacking with Murkrow in your active or Wattrel in your active to hit weakness, especially Murkrow because it's Darkness type, and that hits weaknesses for Mew and Gardevoir and a bunch of other Psychic type stuff right now. So you are not above attacking with a Murkrow. Sometimes you really need to. There's some other little ins and outs to the Pokemon we play here, like Flamigo being one of the only United Wings Pokemon that you really want to play to your bench, unless you absolutely have to. When you do play this to your bench, you can go get the other Flamigo that are in your deck and not in the prize cards and put them into your hand. Usually, you just want to discard them after that. Again, you want as many United Wings Mon in your yard as possible here, and that means you're going to let go of an awful lot of Pokemon into your discard pile, so there's this tension between what you leave on your bench and what you throw in the pile. Aside from that, there's a Manaphy in here to keep them from messing around with your bench too much. You need those guys. And there's a Squawkabilly EX to kind of Professor's Research on turn 1 and really increase your damage output for you. But I know that a lot of you are just staring at these 2 cards. So let me talk about Purloin and, more importantly, Liepard. A lot of these United Wings decks will play a 3/3 Ralts Kirlia line. That is the conventional wisdom, and there's a reason to do that. But I think there's reasons to play Liepard too, because it effectively has the exact same ability that Kirlia has. It's not called Refinement, it's called Trade, but it's the same thing. Discard a card, draw 2 cards, just like Refinement. Now, a couple of reasons why I think that you should consider playing Liepard. A, if you're trying to build a budget deck, this is less expensive than the Ralts Kirlia line, which I think is worth pointing out. But this also has 100 HP, meaning that it can't be one-shotted on your bench by a Greninja. I think that's also pretty important. It's also a lot more difficult for a Sableye to take out over the course of its Lost Mine attack. So that's probably important too. Not only that, but this too is Darkness type. So if you have to throw a Double Turbo on it and attack something, there's a lot of stuff in this format that you're actually hitting 480. Now, the massive downside to playing Liepard is that it is not searchable with Level Ball, whereas Kirlia is, and a lot of times you use that Level Ball to go get the Kirlia. So I will admit that's a massive downside, but I also listed a bunch of upsides for playing Liepard over Kirlia that I think are worth thinking about. Nest Ball's in here not only to go get the occasional benchable Pokemon. Remember, never go get Flamigo with Nest Ball because Flamigo has to be played out of your hand in order to get the Instaflock ability. Don't be the weirdo that does that. Learn from my mistake. We've also got Serena. This discards 3 and draws up to 5, but can sometimes also kind of bosses orders a benched Pokemon V. That can be a good thing to do with this if you just want to throw something in front and then hit it for 240 with United Wings and double prize it. There's Ultra Ball in this deck. We have 4, obviously. We want to discard as many cards as possible. So sometimes we'll Ultra Ball for something and then Ultra Ball that away to go get something else. It's very, very common to just Ultra Ball, Ultra Ball, Ultra Ball, getting a Pokemon and then immediately throwing it into the discard pile. Zinnia's Resolve is in here. This also makes us discard 2 cards. We want that. And then we draw up to 6, a card for each Pokemon our opponent has in play. There's a lot of decks right now that count on full benches, so this will draw us a huge amount of cards some of the time. That's sweet. Clara's in here, often gets back a Ditto and the energy, the Dark Energy, or a Murkrow and the Dark Energy. Clara is very important as a supporter late in the game and does some of the same things that Rescue Carrier can do. Collapse Stadium, though, is I believe our last card we need to talk about. This is important not only for, screwing up other decks some of the time, but also for getting the Squawkabilly off of your own bench. Squawkability is very easily sniped as a 2-prize dude with only 160 HP. A lot of stuff can knock that thing out and 2-prize you. It's really not what you want in a mostly 1-prize deck. So Collapse Stadium can get it off of your bench. Now, if you don't have a Squawkability, but what you do have is a bunch of United Wings Pokemon on your deck, or maybe you have 2 Ditto, a Manaphy, a Liepard, and like a Flamigo or something like that, then you can get the Flamigo and put it in your yard with the Collapse Stadium. That's also a play you need to remember. And those aren't all the little ins and outs. If I was really going to tech this deck, it would take me a good solid hour because there is a lot to learn about United Wings. It seems like a meme, but obviously Alex Szymanski took it all the way to the top 64, I think it was, of the North American International Championships. Doesn't sound too impressive until you realize there's over 1,200 players in that event. So 64 plays just getting to day 2 for a meme deck is pretty impressive. Szymanski did great with the deck, and even though this isn't his exact build, right, I've still been having a lot of success with it in the old Pokemon TCG Live app. The cards are on the way right now, and I cannot wait to actually, in paper, sleeve this thing up, start searching my deck, shuffling my cards and all that, drawing 7, then dropping them, Squawkability, draw 6 more, search my deck 4 times in the same turn. There's a lot of extremely powerful feeling stuff that this deck gets to do while being under $20 right now, and all of this synergy comes together to really actually mean something. This is one of the better budget decks in the format right now, and it befuddles me. This thing is still under like 20 bucks. But graciously, I think that's all I've actually got for now. I apologize I continue to talk your ear off during these videos. I keep thinking they're going to be 15 minutes. They end up being easily twice that, if not more. Our Obsidian Flames set review is also out. That is a video that fits the description I just gave you. I thought that one was going to be short. It is not. But if you're still out there cooking or cleaning or driving or working or whatever it is you're doing right now, check that video out if you need a little bit more podcast style content to get you through your day. There's also a link in the description to the Patreon if you really want to help out around here. It's just $1 a month, but even if all you end up doing is the free stuff, I gotta say again, really appreciate that. We're still trying to grow the channel. I need every little bit I can get. You guys are awesome. But yeah, that's my take on the situation. Let me know how you feel about all this down there in the comments section. And of course, tell me what your favorite budget decks right now are that you've been having a lot of fun with, especially the spicy stuff. That's what I want to know about, man. But anyway, I guess I'll catch you cats in the next one. I am Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, y'all. Spread love and be kind.